Imagine holding absolute, God-given power over a nation. Your word is law. Your position is sacred. Now imagine losing every inch of that kingdom without ever drawing a sword or fighting a single battle. This is the reality of Shakespeare's King Richard II. As he sits on the throne, surrounded by the heavy ceremony and grandeur of the English court, Richard believes his divine right makes him completely untouchable. But the polished surface of his court hides a severe structural weakness. Behind the lavish displays of wealth, the kingdom's foundation is already fracturing under his mismanagement. A monarch who rules exclusively through image and carefully staged language, rather than building actual trust with his subjects, stands on incredibly brittle ground. The cracks begin to show when Richard's cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, publicly accuses Thomas Mowbray of treason. Specifically, Bolingbroke claims Mowbray was involved in the murder of the Duke of Gloucester, who happens to be the king's own uncle. To settle this explosive charge, the state arranges a formal duel. The arena is set, the combatants are armed, and the entire court waits for a brutal, definitive resolution. But right as the swords are drawn, Richard throws down his baton and stops the fight. He denies both men their chance at justice, and instead hands down a sudden decree. Mowbray is exiled for life, and Bolingbroke is banished for several years. Richard chooses a theatrical display of control over solving the actual murder of his uncle. He wants to look like a decisive ruler without having to navigate the messy political fallout of the duel's outcome. By silencing the dispute so arbitrarily, he leaves a massive political vacuum. The nobles watching realize their king governs by impulsive whim, replacing legitimate justice with heavy-handed stagecraft. Shortly after the banishment, Bolingbroke's father, the highly respected John of Gaunt, falls ill and dies. Before passing, Gaunt delivers a blistering critique, warning that Richard's extravagant spending is rapidly bankrupting the blessed land of England. Richard ignores the warning and makes a catastrophic miscalculation. Instead of allowing the exiled Bolingbroke to inherit his father's lands and title, Richard seizes the massive estate for himself to bankroll a military campaign in Ireland. This scale illustrates the balance of feudal law. Authority relies on protecting noble inheritance. By seizing Bolingbroke's estate to fund war, Richard brings the system crashing down. The theft ripples outward. If a king strips a birthright, no property is safe. Resentment detonates into panic. By violating the exact laws that give his own crown legitimacy, Richard alienates his deepest base of support. He actively engineers his own isolation. While Richard sails away to fight in Ireland, entirely disconnected from the domestic crisis he created, Bolingbroke acts. He swiftly returns to English shores, officially claiming he only intends to reclaim his stolen inheritance. We now see a total clash in leadership. Richard speaks in breathtaking, grand poetry, trusting that his divine title will command obedience. Bolingbroke wastes no time on elaborate speeches. He uses practical words that directly coordinate military movement. The English nobles recognize a leader they can actually follow. One by one, they defect, abandoning their eloquent king to rally behind the highly pragmatic rebel. When Richard finally returns from Ireland, the political reality hits him in slow motion. The armies have vanished. The nobles no longer fear his wrath. His divine authority has completely evaporated in his absence. He discovers the hard limit of aesthetic rule. In the ruthless mechanics of statecraft, beautifully constructed sentences are powerless against a man who actually commands the troops. This leads to the defining, highly symbolic climax of the story. Surrounded by his former allies, a defeated Richard is forced to physically hand over his crown to Bolingbroke. Bolingbroke ascends the throne as King Henry IV. Yet Shakespeare refuses to frame this transfer of power as a clean, heroic victory. In the medieval mindset, deposing a divinely anointed monarch fractures the natural and religious order. Even if Richard was an objectively terrible administrator, ripping the crown from his head is a severe moral transgression. Henry secures the state, but he inherits an inescapable guilt. His reign begins beneath a shadow of illegitimacy, ensuring that the violent consequences of this single usurpation will bleed into decades of future English history. Meanwhile, Richard is locked away in Pomfret Castle. He is completely isolated, permanently stripped of his wealth, his followers, and his sacred title. Here, his trajectory inverses. As his physical world shrinks to the cold dimensions of a prison cell, his internal psychological awareness drastically expands. Cut off from the hollow ceremony that defined his life, Richard begins to reflect deeply on time, duty, and suffering. In a tragic stroke of irony, he only discovers what it means to be human after losing the crown that separated him from humanity. His quiet introspection is cut short when one of King Henry's supporters interprets an anxious remark from the new ruler as a kill order. Richard is murdered in his cell, a man who finally gained genuine wisdom only when it was far too late to govern with it. Shakespeare leaves us examining the raw mechanics of leadership.
We are forced to ask, does the right to rule come from a bloodline and a carefully projected image, or does it require practical substance and the moral character to actually lead?